Ever wondered why your kitchen spice rack holds the secrets to ancient empires and epic wars? It sounds crazy, right? But for centuries, spices like pepper, cloves, and nutmeg were more valuable than gold. They weren't just for making food taste good. They were the ultimate status symbol, a form of currency, and even believed to be miracle cures. Let's dive into the spicy history of how these tiny dried seeds and barks shaped our world, fueled exploration, and led to bloody conflicts that lasted for generations. Imagine living in medieval Europe. Life is pretty bland, and so is the food. Refrigeration doesn't exist, so meat often goes bad quickly. Spices were the answer. They could mask the taste of slightly spoiled food, making it edible. But more than that, they were a sign of incredible wealth. If you could afford to sprinkle pepper on your food, you were basically the equivalent of someone today driving a soup. Only the super rich could get their hands on them, and they would show off their wealth by using spices lavishly in their feasts. So, where do these magical powders come from? For Europeans, they came from a mysterious, far-off land they called the Orient. The journey was long and incredibly dangerous. Spices like cloves and nutmeg grew only on a few tiny islands in modern-day Indonesia known as the Spice Islands. To get them to Europe, they had to travel thousands of miles over land and sea. This supply chain was controlled by a series of middlemen. Arab traders would sail to India and the Spice Islands, buy the spices, and then sell them to Venetian merchants in ports like Alexandria and Constantinople. Each time the spices changed hands, the price went up, and up, and up. By the time a peppercorn reached a kitchen in London or Paris, its price had been inflated by a ridiculous amount. We're talking markups of thousands of %. The Venetians in particular got fabulously wealthy by holding a monopoly on the European spice trade. They controlled the gateway to the East, and anyone who wanted spices had to pay their exorbitant prices. This made other European nations incredibly jealous. They saw Venice's wealth and thought, why should they get all the profits? What if we could bypass them and go directly to the source? This desire to break the Venetian monopoly and find a direct sea route to the Spice Islands is what kicked off the Age of Discovery. You've heard of Christopher Columbus, right? His famous 1492 voyage wasn't just for the thrill of exploration. He was funded by the Spanish crown with one primary goal: to find a westward route to the Indies to get spices. He famously miscalculated the size of the earth and ran into the Americas instead, but the motivation was all about pepper and cloves. A few years later, the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama actually succeeded. In 1498, he sailed around the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, and reached India. This was a monumental achievement. For the first time, a European power had a direct sea link to the source of the spice trade. This completely shattered the Venetian monopoly. The Portuguese quickly moved to establish a trading empire. They weren't just peaceful traders, though. They used their superior naval power, with cannons on their ships, to violently seize control of key trading ports. They established fortresses across the Indian Ocean, from Goa in India to Malacca in modern-day Malaysia. Their goal was simple: control the spice trade by force and ensure all the profits flowed back to Portugal. They fought battles against local rulers, Arab traders, and even the Ottoman Empire, who all wanted a piece of the action. For about a century, Portugal dominated the spice trade, and the city of Lisbon became the new wealthy hub for spices in Europe, replacing Venice. But the story doesn't end there. Other European powers saw Portugal's success and wanted in. Enter the Dutch. In the early 17th century, the Dutch were a rising maritime power, and they were determined to take over the spice trade. They formed the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC. This wasn't just a trading company, it was a state-sponsored powerhouse. The VOC had the authority to wage war, build forts, sign treaties, and even colonize territories. It was essentially a government and a military operating under the guise of a corporation. The Dutch were ruthless. They systematically drove the Portuguese out of the East Indies. Their methods were brutal and single-minded. Their main target was control over the most valuable spices of all: cloves, nutmeg, and mace. These grew exclusively on the tiny Banda Islands. The Dutch went to war with the Bandanese people, who simply wanted to trade with whomever they pleased. In 1621, the Dutch Governor-General led a military campaign that resulted in the massacre or enslavement of almost the entire population of the Banda Islands. They then repopulated the islands with Dutch planters and enslaved workers to create a perfect, brutal monopoly. For a while, the Dutch East India Company became the richest corporation in world history. They had complete control over the production and price of nutmeg and cloves. They would even burn excess spice crops to keep the supply low and the prices artificially high. They fought wars not just with local populations, but also with their European rivals, particularly the English. The Anglo-Dutch wars were fought all over the globe, but a key battleground was the Spice Islands. In one famous exchange, the Dutch traded a small island they controlled in North America to the English in exchange for an island in the Banda chain that was rich in nutmeg. That North American island? It was called Manhattan. Yes, New York City was traded for a spice island. That's how valuable these spices were. So, why did it all end? A few things happened. Firstly, other nations eventually broke the Dutch monopoly. A daring Frenchman managed to smuggle clove and nutmeg seedlings out of the Spice Islands and successfully planted them in other French colonies, like more. Once the plants could be grown elsewhere, the Dutch monopoly was shattered and the prices began to fall. Secondly, tastes changed. New commodities from the Americas, like sugar, coffee, tea, and chocolate, started to become popular in Europe. While spices were still used, they were no longer the ultimate luxury item they once were. The focus of global trade began to shift. Finally, the era of colonial empires changed the entire economic landscape. It was no longer about controlling one specific commodity, but about controlling vast territories and their resources. So, the next time you sprinkle some cinnamon in your coffee or add a dash of pepper to your dinner, take a moment to think about the incredible journey those spices represent. They tell a story of exploration, wealth, empires rising and falling, and brutal wars fought over tiny specks of flavor that we now take for granted. The spice trade literally redrew the map of the world and connected cultures in ways that had never happened before, for better and for worse. It's a powerful reminder that the most ordinary things in our lives can have the most extraordinary histories. Thanks for watching. If you found this spicy tale of history interesting, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. See you next time!